שלום רב.
הנה מצב.
לא, לא.
What'd you say?
She's doing שלום רב.
I was like, it's a little early for Shalom Rab. All right, you ready?
הנה מה טוב ומנעים שבת אחים גם יחד. הנה מה טוב ומנעים שבת אחים גם יחד. הנה מה טוב ומנעים שבת אחים גם יחד. הנה מה טוב ומנעים שבת אחים גם יחד.
How good it is,
How good it is,
how sweet it is,
how sweet it is to be together on this day.
how good it is,
How good it is,
how sweet it is,
how sweet it is to be together on this day.
Please sing with us.
הנה מה טוב ומנעים שבת אחים גם יחד. הנה מה טוב ומנעים שבת אחים גם יחד. הנה מה טוב ומנעים שבת אחים גם יחד. הנה מה טוב ומנעים שבת אחים גם יחד.
How good it is,
How good it is,
how sweet it is,
how sweet it is to be together on this day.
how good it is,
How good it is,
how sweet it is,
how sweet it is to be together on this day. Shalom Aleichem, Salam Aleikum. Shalom Aleichem, Salam Aleikum. Shalom Aleichem, Salam Aleikum. Shalom Aleichem, Salam Aleikum. הנה מה טוב ומנעים שבת אחים גם יחד. 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 שבת אחים גם יחד. שבת אחים גם יחד. How good it is.
Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom, everybody. How good it is to be together on this Shabbat with the sunlight still coming in. And we have the beautiful view of the greenery outside. For those of you who don't know, our Gannon Gill school and educator Erica Wilkoff actually just created a story walk for us outside, which basically means that there's an area outside through the woods where we're going to be able to tell stories, and there's a path to walk as you tell the story. It's going to be beautiful. We have an outdoor classroom, and we're going to be able to see it from here in just, I think, like a week. So this is very, very exciting. At this moment, I would like to invite Jeannie and Jordan Tobin, please, to light our Shabbat candles. The blessing can be found on page 2.
As these Shabbat candles give light to all who behold them, so may we, by our lives, give light to all who behold us. As their brightness reminds us of the generations of Israel who have kindled light, so may we, in our own day, be among those who kindle light.
Let us light these lights for the world tonight. Let our hearts unite in the
light, in the light. Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kirshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu. Lihadlik ner shel Shabbat. Lihadlik ner shel Shabbat.
Blessed are you, Adonai, our God, sovereign of the universe, who hallows with mitzvot, commanding us to kindle the lights of Shabbat. Amen.
So, as we welcome Shabbat, we are just at the end of a special holiday that we don't really talk about enough, called Tu B'Av, which is the 15th of Av, not to be confused with Tisha B'Av, which is the date of the destruction of the temple. The Tu B'Av is actually a first, really second century of the Common Era holiday, where it was a matchmaking holiday, where it is actually in our Talmud called one of the happiest and joyous days in our tradition, along with Yom Kippur. Didn't see that coming. But Tu B'Av has actually been revived in the last few decades, especially in Israel, the modern state of Israel, as a day of love. If I had to compare it to something, it would be what we call Valentine's Day here, with heart-shaped balloons and chocolates and flowers, etc. So it is quite a joyous day in Israel. And so I hope that joy and that love resonates in this space tonight as we bring in the Shabbat. And with that, I invite you to please rise and join me for the Chatzi Kaddish on page 26.
יתקדש ויתקדש מרבה ביום דברה חירותי וימליך מלכותי בחיי כל יומך ובחיי כל בית ישראל בגלה ובזמן קריב וימרו
Amen.
יהי שמרה במברך לעולם ולעולמי עולמיה יתברך וישתבח ויתפאר ויתרומם ויתנשא ויתהדר ויתעלה ויתעלה שמי דקודשא
ברכו
לעילא מן כל ברכתה ושירתה תושבחתה ונחמתה דמירן בימה באמרו
Amen. You may be seated. We continue on page 31. On the bottom of the page, we read together, "This is an hour of change. Within it we stand uncertain on the border of light. Shall we draw back or cross over? Where shall our hearts turn? Shall we draw back, my brother, my sister, or cross over? This is the hour of change, and within it we stand quietly on the border of light. What lies before us, shall we draw back, my brother, my sister, or cross over? Baruch atah Adonai, hama'ariv aravim.
Ahavat olam, Beit Yisrael, Amecha ahavta, Amecha ahavta. Torah u'mitzvot, Chukim u'mishpatim, Otanu lemadeta, Otanu lemadeta. Alakein Adonai Eloheinu b'shachbeinu, U'kumenu nasiach b'chukecha, V'nismach b'divrei Toratecha, U'mitzvotecha le'olam aved, Ki chem ayenu, Be'orach yameinu, Uvachem nege yomam balayla, Nege yomam balayla. V'yachavatcha al tasir, Mimenu le'olam alamim, Baruch atah Adonai, Ohev amo Yisrael, Ohev amo Yisrael. Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad. 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 Baruch Shem Kivod Malachuto Le'olam Vaed. Baruch Shem Kivod Malachuto Le'olam Vaed. Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad. Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad. Adonai Echad.
We continue on page 36.
V'ahavta et Adonai Elohecha b'chol לבבך ובכל נפשך ובכל מאודיך, וחיו הדברים האלה אשר אנוכי מצווך היום על לבבך, ושיננתם לבניך ודיברת בם בשבתך ובביתך ובלכתך ובדרך ובשוכבך ובקומך וקשרתם לאות על ידיך, וחיו לטוטפות בין עיניך, וכתבתם על מזוזות ביתך ובשעריך, למען תזכרו ועשיתם את כל מצוותיי, והייתם קדושים לאלוהיכם. אני אדוני אלוהיכם, אשר הוצאתי אתכם מארץ מצרים, להיות לכם לאלוהים. אני אדוני אלוהיכם.
We continue on the top of page 43. Let there be love and understanding among us. Let peace and friendship be our shelter from life's storms. Adonai, help us walk with good companions, to live with hope in our hearts and eternity in our thoughts, that we may lie down in peace and rise up, waiting to do your will. Baruch Ata Adonai, הפורס סוכת שלום עלינו ועל כל עמו ישראל ועל ירושלים. השכיבנו אדוני אלוהינו לשלום, והעמידנו שומרנו לחיים. השכיבנו אדוני אלוהינו לשלום, והעמידנו שומרנו אלוהינו לחיים. השכיבנו אדוני אלוהינו לשלום, והעמידנו שומרנו אלוהינו לחיים. והעמידנו שומרנו לחיים. ושמור צאתנו ובואנו לחיים ושלום מעתה ועד עולם. השכיבנו אדוני אלוהינו לשלום, והעמידנו שומרנו לחיים. השכיבנו אדוני אלוהינו לשלום, והעמידנו שומרנו אלוהינו לחיים. השכיבנו אדוני אלוהינו לשלום, השכיבנו שומרנו אלוהינו לחיים. והעמידנו שומרנו לחיים. I invite you to please rise if you are able and join us for the Amidah on page 46.
אדוני שפתי תפתח ופי יגיד תהילתך. Adonai, open up my lips that my mouth may declare your praise. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu v'Elohei avoteinu v'imotenu, Elohei Abraham, Elohei Yitzchak, Elohei Yaakov, Elohei Sarah, Elohei Rivka, Elohei Rachel, Elohei Leah, Hahel HaGadol HaGibor v'Hanorah, El Elyon, Gomel Chasadim Tovim, V'Konei HaKol, וזוכר חסדי אבות ואימהות, עוזר מושיע ומגן, ברוך אתה אדוני, מגן אברהם בדרך צרה. אתה גיבור לעולם אדוני, מחיי הכל אתה, רב להושיע, מוריד הצל, מכלכל חיים בחסד, מחיי הכל ברחמים רבים, סומך נופלים ורופא חולים, ומתיר אסורים, ומקיים אמונתו לשני עפר. מי כמוך בעל גבורות ומדום מלך, מלך ממית ומחיה ומצמיח ישועה, ונאמן אתה לחיות הכל. ברוך אתה אדוני, מחיי הכל.
You are holy, your name is holy, and those who are holy praise you every day. Blessed are you, Adonai, the holy God. Baruch ata Adonai, ha'el hakadosh. Please be seated. Grant us peace, your most precious gift, O eternal source of peace, and give us the will to proclaim its message to all the peoples of the earth. Bless our country as a safeguard of peace, its advocate among the nations. May contentment reign within our borders, health and happiness within our homes. Strengthen the bonds of friendship and fellowship among all the inhabitants of every land. Plant virtue in every soul, and may the love of your name hallow every home and every heart. Praised are you, eternal one, who blesses our people with peace. Baruch ata Adonai, hamavarech et amo Israel bashalom.
Shalom Rav al Yisrael amcha tasim leolam. Shalom Rav al Yisrael amcha tasim leolam. Ki ata melech adon lechol hashalom. Tasim leolam, Shalom Rav al Yisrael amcha, tasim leolam. V'tov beinecha levarech et amcha Yisrael b'chol ed u'b'chol shah. Shalom Rav al Yisrael amcha tasim leolam. Shalom Rav al Yisrael amcha tasim leolam. Tasim leolam. Tasim.
We continue with a personal prayer.
So
רפים רפים, והגיון ליבי לפניך, יהיו לרצון עם רפים רפים, והגיון ליבי לפניך. אדוני צורי, אדוני צורי, אדוני צורי וגואלי, אדוני צורי, אדוני צורי, אדוני צורי וגואלי, יהיו לרצון עם רפים רפים, והגיון ליבי לפניך, יהיו לרצון עם רפים רפים, והגיון ליבי לפניך. אדוני צורי, אדוני צורי, אדוני צורי וגואלי, אדוני צורי, אדוני צורי, אדוני צורי וגואלי.
Good evening, Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat shalom.
So nice to see everybody who is here, and welcome to those who are live streaming. Perhaps some of you recall when I spoke a couple of weeks ago in my Devar Torah, as we approached the end of the biblical book of Numbers, the fourth book of the 5 books of Moses, and I noted that at the very end of that book, we come to the very end of the wandering in the wilderness. And the last 2 words, actually, of the book of Numbers are Jericho and Jordan. As the author of that book prepares us for an immediate crossing of the Jordan River and the beginning of the conquest. But I also noted that, and here I was fantasizing, that author at that moment took another look in the mirror to see exactly whether or not he or she was following the logic of that physical journey into the Promised Land. And I suggested that when that author looked into the mirror, he or she saw something else. That in fact, the basic journey on which the Israelites had embarked was not a physical one, but really a moral and spiritual one. And that the arrival in the Promised Land was only the beginning of fulfilling the promise of the Promised Land. And what is the promise of the Promised Land? I speculated. It was the 5th book of the 5 books of Moses, which, and I used this kind of language, which was shoved in between the book of Numbers and the book of Joshua, between the 4th and the 6th book, to bring the 5 books of Moses to its climax and to lay the foundations for the life of the people in the land of Israel. What, in fact, is the promise of the Promised Land? And my suggestion is that the book of Deuteronomy tells us about that, both descriptively and aspirationally. This, in a way, is both the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution of the Israelites as they continue their journey down through history. And in fact, our Torah portion for this Shabbat, which is the second portion in the book of Deuteronomy, Ve'etchanan, is loaded with aspects like this. Ve'etchanan, chapters 3 through 7 of Deuteronomy, give us a view of history. In it is contained the Shema and the V'ahavta. We have the second set, the reiteration, with some changes, of the Ten Commandments. We find many of the commandments that are enjoined upon the people as they prepare into the Promised Land. What is so very interesting, though, is that right after the V'ahavta, in chapter 6 of Deuteronomy, verses 17 and 18, we find something fascinating. Be sure to keep the commandments, the decrees, and the laws that the Lord your God has enjoined upon you. No surprise there. But here comes a surprise. Do what is right and good in the sight of the Lord, that it may go well with you. What can this mean? Do what is right and what is good. In a word, what it means is the expression of the Torah's distinction between law and ethics. It's a suggestion that in some sense, ethics, moral dictates, are separable from the law, that there is a moral sphere that is not commanded in the same way that law is. But it seems to suggest that law is not enough, that rules are not enough, that not everything we need to be a just and compassionate and flourishing society, not everything we need for this can be contained in law, can be codified into law. That is, the suggestion seems to be that if all we have is law, then what we have is the skeleton of a society, but not its heart. That we have the body, the bones of society, but not its soul. What is necessary is not simply law, but what the philosopher Montesquieu described as the spirit of the law. The spirit of the law, which is the animating force stirring the hearts of citizens for their proper behavior in society. Let me give you a stunning example of this idea from the Talmud. Rabbi Yochanan said, Jerusalem was destroyed because the inhabitants judged in accordance with the Torah law itself. Notice it doesn't say that Jerusalem was destroyed because the people violated the law. Jerusalem was destroyed because the inhabitants followed the law. Well, the Talmud goes on, should they rather have followed the laws of Zoroastrians? Say rather, because they based their judgments solely on Torah law and did not act in accordance with the spirit of the law, end quote. And the great sage Nachmanides goes on to say that a parallel phrase, you shall be holy, this was issued because the scope of the Torah's injunctions regarding personal conduct notwithstanding, a lustful sensualist could observe the letter of the law and yet be a scoundrel with Torah license. Here we have, it seems to me, something quite striking. As important as law and law-abidingness is, what is even more important, perhaps more vitally important, are the foundations, the foundational values and judgments that serve as the necessary underpinning of the law. And what is that underpinning? What is that spirit of the law? I suggest it's things that cannot be adjudicated, things that cannot be enacted as law, things like the development of character and society's commitment to character development, ethical sensitivity, the consideration of the needs of others, the taming of egocentricity, and the elimination of indifference to the well-being of others. Things like loyalty to the community and a predilection for benevolent action. What is key here, as I've just said, is that these things cannot be legislated, nor can they be regulated by the state. Let's call this the power of supra-legal obligation. Why then, according to the sages, was Jerusalem destroyed? It was not, as one sage put it, because of retributive punishment, that the Israelites in Jerusalem sinned and therefore God sent a conqueror to punish them. Jerusalem was destroyed not because of retributive punishment. It was rather as a natural consequence of the fact, and here I quote, that a wholly legalistic community simply cannot exist. Supralegal conduct is the cement of a society. Its absence results in disintegration. Standing upon law alone is ruin. Why then, as the rabbis ask again, was Jerusalem destroyed? Because of what they describe as sinat chinam, gratuitous hatred of one person for another, of one group for another, under which circumstances the group itself disintegrates and falls into chaos. The main point, it seems to me, is this. A society can create all the laws it desires. What it can't legislate is respect for the law, the love of one's community, and the fervent desire to follow the law. And the people will respect the law. The people will be inclined to follow the law if they feel that it is deployed justly and fairly, without fear or favor, and when it serves the needs not of the few, but of the many. And I want to ask, how can these values be inculcated? My answer, not through the law itself, but through the necessary foundation of the law, which I'm now going to define as culture. Culture, what the Germans call Bildung, education, character formation, the shaping of the human being, the cultivation of one's personal and social skills. And here I want to suggest, which I think you'll see has been implicit all along, is a distinction between law and culture. Law eventuates in specific rules, specific procedures to facilitate the application, the just application of the law. Culture, on the other hand, something much more amorphous, but all the more necessary. Culture is a mood, a framework, a foundation. which seeks to form the moral sense of its citizens, to care deeply about the right and the good. It is formed in part by telling stories, by the exhibition of mentorship, and by the integrity of the community's leaders. That is, by its implicit and explicit culture. Culture, according to a contemporary physician, is the sum total of shared habits and aspirations. And the poet E.E. Cummings poignantly captured the idea of culture when he claims that he learned the power of Plato's allegory of the cave with his mother's milk. And commitment to these values can be inculcated gradually, and only gradually, by the culture's and society's central institutions, the family, the school, the enlightened synagogue and church and mosque. Respect for and love of country are the values that can be taught and reinforced by elements of the common culture, which amounts to the cultivation of a moral sense. But let's not be naive. No complex society has ever been immune from cultural conflicts. Conflicts over basic norms and values. Take, for example, biblical times. Not only does the book of Deuteronomy recognize the power of culture, it also illustrates the conflicts which threaten that culture through searing narratives which feature fundamental disagreements between king and prophet, between prophet and priest, between patriarchy and the skeptics and the critics of patriarchy, between the idea of holiness as sacrifice and the idea of holiness as deed. And what's interesting here is that the 6 books that follow the book of Deuteronomy are based on Deuteronomy itself. And so in this sense, Deuteronomy is a deeply dialectical text. It sets down the parameters and the foundations for a just society, as it at the same time details all of the threats, all of the conflicts that can corrode that very foundation. And I'm sure you will agree with me that our struggles in America today result from radically different views of what America is, of America's future, and of America's fundamental values. And the willingness to break the law, as we have seen, and it has been threatened so often, completely inexcusable on its face, is a symptom of the erosion of the values that undergird the law, the very values that embody the American idea. These have broken down. The American consensus has been shattered. So when the authors or editors brought the book of Numbers and the wilderness period to an end and began to move to the book of Joshua, they had the courage to think again and to ask themselves, what is our journey's true meaning? What are the lineaments of our travels down through time? Is it the entrance and the re-entrance into the promised land? Or is it more profoundly and with more difficulty, the promise of the promised land? Deuteronomy, I have argued, is the second look into the mirror. And by doing so, the author had two fundamental insights: that it is law that makes for a healthy and purposeful society, but that it is morality that undergirds the law, the commitment to the right and the good that makes healthy and effective law itself. Thank you. We continue now, as we always do at this point in our service, as we think about those members of our families and circle of friends who are ailing of body, of mind, of spirit. As my hand passes over your section of the congregation, please feel free to mention out loud or to speak to your hearts those about whom you are thinking, so that we can add our prayers to your prayers for their return to full health. Let's join together with the singing of the Mishabera. You can find the words on page 253.
May the source of strength, who bless the ones before us, help us find the courage to make our lives a blessing, and let us say, Amen. Mishabera imotenu mikor habracha. Bless those in need of healing with refuah shlema, the renewal of body, the renewal of spirit, and let us say, Amen.
I'm sure that those of you who engage in public speaking will recognize that when the speaker is trying to put across a series of ideas, he or she often gets lost in the world of his or her own declamations. And one of the consequences of this is that the speaker, nobody that you know, sometimes forgets to observe what comes next. And I just did that. So, having sung the Mishabera and a prayer for peace, let me mention those who are on the list that I have been given. Dennis Brooks, Amelia Hegarty, Maddie Jefferson, Alex Hunkins, Richard Moore, Betty Pickus, Bob Shippey. We pray for their return to full health. And now we turn in our prayer books to page 282, and we rise for the Aleinu.
Aleinu l'shabech l'adon hakol, לתת גדולה ליוצר בראשית, שלא עשנו כגויי הארצות, ולא זמנו כמשפחות האדמה, שלא שם בחלקנו כהם, ויגור עלינו ככל עמונם, ואנחנו קוראים ומשתחווים ומודים לפני מלך מלכי המלכים, הקדוש ברוך הוא, ונאמר והיה אדוני למלך על כל הארץ, ביום ההוא, ביום ההוא יהיה אדוני אחד, ושמו אחד.
You may be seated. And we turn now to page 289 as we prepare for the recitation of the Mourner's Kaddish. In nature's ebb and flow, God's eternal law abides. When tears dim our vision and grief clouds our understanding, we often lose sight of God's eternal plan. Yet we know that growth and decay, life and death all reveal a divine purpose. God, who is our support in the struggles of life, is also our hope in death. We have set God before us and shall not despair. In God's hands are the souls of all the living and the spirits of all flesh. Under God's protection we abide, and by God's love are we comforted. O life of our life, soul of our soul, cause your light to shine into our hearts and fill our spirits with abiding trust in you. We think now of our loved ones whom death has recently taken from us, those who died at this season in years past, and those whom we have drawn into our hearts with our own. We think especially of those members of our congregational family whom we lost during this past week, Marilyn Joan Berman, Goldie Fishman, and we think of those who have been laid to rest within the last 30 days. Lev Krasilchikov, Nancy Schneider, Loretta Shames, Irving Brown, William M. Goldstein, Jeffrey L. Korak, Byron Krantz. And we take into our hearts those individuals whose yahrzeit occurs at this time. George Alanek, Alexander Auerbach, Ricky Bauer, Rhoda Bialis, Minnie Bloomberg, Rose Bloomberg, Bertha S. Blum, Ruth Brooker, David Burstein, Robert Chaplin, Vera Kott, Suji Crystal, Samuel I. Dreyfus, Richard Dave Felber, Helen K. Fisher, Benjamin Franklin, Jacob Golden, Rose Golden, Max Goldman, Marcus Goldsmith, Malvine Gottlieb, Herbert G. Goulder, Terry Beverly Goulder, Mayor Green, Dorothy Ray Greenbaum, Irving Hand, Freda Oshakovsky, Hazunke, Charles R. Heller, Dr. Arnold L. Heller, Frida Heller, Isidore Horvitz, Milton C. Kane, Rose Kaufman, Estelle M. Klein, Ignatz Klein, Louis K. Levy, Ellen Bonnie Mandel, Leslie Marks, Ben E. Miller, Henrietta Miller, Leon N. Mitnick, Shimon Wolf Kashka Morgenstern, Florence Marks Moss, Abe L. Niebel, Samuel S. Newman, Isaac Nussbaum, Max Rosenfield, Irene W. Roth, Marcella Rubin, Dora Edinger, Sands, Frederick D. Sands, Eva Schwartz, William Lewis Selman, Maurice H. Shapiro, Michael Charlotte, Fanny Bachman Schoenfeld, James M. Schulman, Jules E. Spiegel, Molly Davis Teitelbaum, Howard F. Ullman, Louis A. Unger, Ludwig Weglein, Elmer White, Frida S. Yolson, and Gertrude Zweig. If anybody would like to make mention of a loved one about whom you're thinking, please do so at this point. And now I invite those who are observing the Shiva period, the first 7 days after the death of a loved one, if you wish to please rise. Those who are observing the Shloshim period, the first 30 days after the death of a loved one, please rise. And those who are observing the yahrzeit, the anniversary of the death of a loved one, if you will, please rise. And now as a caring congregation, let us all rise as our griefs and sympathies are mingled as we together sanctify the name of our God with the words of the Kaddish on page 294, as we say together, Yitgadal v'yitkadash shemei rabbah, v'alma divrach chirutei v'yamlich malchutei, B'chayechon of Yomechon, v'chayedechol Beit Yisrael, ba'agalav izman kari, v'yamru amen. Yehei shemei rabba mevarach le'olam olamei elmaya, yitbarach v'yishtabach v'yitpa'ar v'yitromam v'yitnaseh, v'yitadar v'yitaleh v'yitalal shmei dekudisha b'richu, le'ela min kol birchata v'shirata, tushbachata v'nechemata da'amiran bi'alma v'yamru amen. Yehei shalom rabba min shemaya v'chayim, aleinu v'al kol Yisrael v'yamru amen. Oseh shalom bimromav, hu yaseh shalom. Aleinu v'al kol Yisrael v'yamru amen. May the source of peace send peace to all who mourn and comfort all the bereaved among us. And let us say together.
Amen.
You may be seated. As we customarily do, we always follow the mourner's Kaddish, the prayer through which we remember with love our beloved deceased, and we follow that with moments of celebration, with moments of happiness and joy. We have a special Shehechianu moment tonight. Phil Wasserstrom has just celebrated his 92nd birthday.
Happy birthday.
Yesterday. Phil, we wish you Ad Mea Ve'esrim, many, many more years of health and happiness, and to continue yours and Peggy's wonderful, decades-long contribution to the well-being of our congregation. I also like for us, each of us, in the silence of our own heart, to think about the blessings with which we are endowed. One of the functions of a blessing I've always felt is like this proverbial string around our finger that reminds us of something we may have forgotten and forgotten habitually. Blessings remind us of the many wonderful things in our lives. So I invite you to pause for a minute, close your eyes, and focus on some of the blessings that you experience in your life. And let us sing together the Shehechianu.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam שהחיינו וקיימנו והגיענו לזמן הזה. Amen.
We're going to conclude our service with the singing of Dodi Li in honor of Tu B'Av, about which Rabbi Dowdoon spoke at the beginning of the service. Let's sing Dodi Li together.
If you want to sing with us, it's on page 349. Dodi li vani lo haroeh bashoshanim dodi li mizodora min hamidbar mizodala min hamidbar. Dodi li
one of the great founders of German Romanticism late in the 18th century, Georg Hamann, who himself was not a biblical scholar, said that it would be worth spending 10 years studying biblical Hebrew in order to read Psalm 104 in the original. One of the greatest poems in any language. In it, we find the phrase, "Wine gladdens the human heart." Please join me in the singing of the Kaddish.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, borei peri hagafen. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kiddushanu b'mitzvotav v'yiratanu, v'shabbat kodsho b'ahava uvratzon inchilanu. Zikaron le'maaseh b'reishit, ki hu yom tehillah lemikra'ei kodesh, zecher l'tziat Mitzrayim. Kivanu v'charta v'yodanu kidashta Shabbat kodecha b'ahava uvratzon hinachatanu. Baruch atah Adonai mekadesh haShabbat. Amen.
L'chaim.
L'chaim.
And now the blessing over our bounty.
You okay?
I'm getting close.
Okay.
We didn't plan this pause.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, hamotzi lechem min haaretz. Amen.
Adonai Osle Amo Yitain, Adonai Varechet Amova Shalom. May the Lord give strength to God's people. May the Lord bless all of God's peoples with the blessings of shalom, of peace.
Amen.
Amen. Shabbat shalom.
Shabbat shalom.
Okay.